My name is Amelia Hayes. I'm 32 years old, born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina, the kind of city where church steeples cut the skyline and people say, "How's your mama?" before they ask your name. I'm an architect, the sort who can read a building's bones the way a doctor reads a pulse. I design schools, libraries, and homes with clean lines and honest materials. Maybe that's why I missed the hairline cracks in my own life. They were hidden behind a fresh coat of charm. The night everything snapped, the sky over Charleston was the color of a ripe peach, and a quartet's strings braided jasmine-sweet air into something close to a dream. It looked like a celebration. It felt like a test I didn't know I was taking. The estate sat just beyond the city's historic district, old live oaks with lanterns threaded through their branches, a veranda deep enough to shelter whole conversations, and inside, a ballroom of pale plaster and good intentions. My parents moved through the room the way old Charleston families do, trying not to show how proud they were. My mother squeezed my hand. "You've never looked happier, baby." My father, a quiet university professor, gave me the kind of smile that says more than words ever do. On the other side, Jackson Pierce, 33, sharp suit, sharper smile, the heir to a respected New York group, laughed the laugh that made people turn their heads as if the sound itself were money. We had built a public story together, the principled architect and the promising entrepreneur, a bridge between Southern poise and Northern velocity. If you took a picture of that room, you'd think everything was inevitable, as if the future were a ribbon already tied. To guests, we were the perfect couple bathed in string music and candlelight. To me, there were little glitches in the rhythm. Jackson's phone lighting his palm when he thought no one noticed, the half-second pause when an old friend joked about taming the wild lion, the faintly hollow echo tucked inside his laugh. I believed in trust. I believed foundations mattered more than decoration. I told myself that love was load-bearing, and that small noises in the walls could be fixed with patience and a better brace. After dinner, the toasts began. My father spoke first, brief and sincere, offering a few words that sounded like a blessing. "May your home be a place where truth can sit down and rest." Jackson's father followed, effusive and proud, praising his son's drive and welcoming me as if I were a strategic alliance and a beloved daughter in equal measure. The quartet softened, glasses clinked. The master of ceremonies, expert in curating emotion, lifted the room with a practiced smile. Now, the couple. Jackson took the microphone and the light seemed to find him. "Good evening," he said, voice even and warm, flattering the air itself. "Thank you for joining us." He turned toward me. "Amelia is extraordinary, intelligent, talented. She understands me." A wave of smiles, the murmur of approval. My cheeks warmed, my chest loosened. This, I thought, is what it looks like when two people build the first stone together. Then the temperature changed, like a draft from a door you didn't know was open. Jackson's smile tightened by a degree. "In relationships," he said, "I believe in absolute honesty." He held the word like a lantern. From the beginning, from tonight. The jazz melody in the background thinned into thread. People leaned in. His eyes pinned me as if there were only the two of us in the room. "I need to make one thing clear," he continued. "Clara Reed, my ex, will always be part of my life." The name moved through the room like a ripple. I saw it strike faces I knew and faces I didn't. Clara was not a secret, she was a story his friends knew by heart. "I will never abandon her," he said deliberately. "As a friend, a business partner, our bond will exist forever." His gaze hardened as it landed on me. Courthouse sure, verdict ready. "Amelia, if you don't like it, if you can't accept it, we'll call off this wedding." Silence has a weight when it falls all at once. A spoon hit a plate in the far corner with the violence of a gunshot. I felt hundreds of eyes flicker toward me, cataloging shock, pity, curiosity, calculation. My father's jaw set. My mother's mouth opened without sound. The quartet went still. It would have been the perfect time to crumble. A prettier script might have had me flush and tremble, flee to the veranda, weep into the jasmine. But there was a ringing in my ears, and inside that ring a kind of clarity I had only ever felt on job sites when a rotten beam reveals itself and the whole structure finally makes sense. In seconds, everything lined up. The midnight calls, the screen turned just out of view, the studied vagueness of work stress. What Jackson offered wasn't honesty. It was a performance of control dressed in the vocabulary of virtue. He wasn't asking for a conversation. He was naming the terms in public, daring me to protect his image by capitulation. It was a contract read aloud. Clara as permanent clause, my consent as signature, our future contingent on my willingness to love in the shadow of his past. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't broken. It was awake. I turned to the master of ceremonies, and to Jackson, and to everyone, and lifted the second microphone that someone, stunned beyond protocol, placed in my palm. My voice felt like cool water. "Okay," I said, just that. I set the microphone down with care, as if placing a fragile object back where it belonged. I gave my parents a small nod that meant, I am safe. Then I looked to the MC. "We can continue," I said evenly. "I believe dessert can be served." The room didn't know how to metabolize that. Whispers scraped at the edges. Jackson stared, blinking, a beat too slow. Whatever scene he'd expected, a pleading negotiation, a public surrender, this wasn't it. Acceptance, delivered like a calm incision, can feel like refusal when you're used to winning by spectacle. The evening completed itself on a kind of polite autopilot. I thanked guests, held hands that squeezed too hard, accepted pity as if it were a stranger's coat draped over my shoulders. Warm, misfitting, unnecessary. Jackson tried to catch me between tables. "We need to talk," he hissed. "What did you mean by okay?" Later, I told him with a smile that did not touch my eyes. Later is a hallway with no doors. It leads nowhere at all. On the drive home, my father's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. My mother stared at the passing oaks as if they might answer her silent prayers. The city unfurled in smudges of yellow light. Relief expanded in my chest like a breath I'd been holding for months. Love is a structure, I thought, and structures fail from the foundation before the roof ever leaks. You can repaint a facade 1,000 times and call it hope. Or you can admit the load-bearing truth. If the base is cracked, you stop the party, take off your heels, and pick up a crowbar. At home, in my room washed in pearl gray and lamplight, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the quiet sit beside me. My drafting table was a still life of a life imagined. Wedding palette swatches, dress sketches, a floor plan for a future house with morning light in the kitchen. I slid each drawing into a drawer. Not torn, preserved, neutral, archived. My phone pulsed on the nightstand like a restless thing. Friends, relatives, Jackson. I read a few lines. "You embarrassed me." I was only being honest. "Why are you acting childish?" I turned the phone face down. If honesty is a pillar, it can hold weight. If it's a spotlight, it only blinds. Before sleeping, though I didn't, not really, I opened my laptop and created a new document. Wedding cancellation plan, vendors, dates, terms, penalties. I wrote the emails clean and kind and unambiguous. Due to personal reasons, the event is canceled. Please advise all fees. I will honor every clause. Control, reclaimed, is not revenge. It is alignment. It is choosing which walls to keep and which to take down. By the time the first church bells stitched dawn through the dark, the plan was complete. Outside, the city yawned. Inside, I stood and stretched and watched the sky go from bruise to blush. The story you think you're in can end without anyone bleeding. It can end with a single word that opens another door. Maybe that's why my okay felt like the first honest line of a blueprinted life I would actually live. People say Charleston is a city that remembers. The streets remember who courted whom and which porches held which secrets. Let the city remember this then, a party where a man performed an ultimatum and a woman who builds for a living decided she would not live inside anyone's performance. The foundation mattered more than the chandelier. So I picked the foundation. and by morning I had already chosen where to begin. At first light, the city felt rinsed. The marsh air held that faint mineral smell that makes you think of beginnings. I brewed tea, not coffee, something steady, not sharp, and opened my laptop to the document I had named without drama, but with precision, Wedding Cancellation Plan. I'm an architect. I solve problems by sequencing them. A crisis becomes a checklist, and a checklist becomes a map out of the dark. My mother knocked and set a bowl of soup beside the keyboard the way only a mother can, apology and blessing in one gesture. She didn't say, "Are you sure?" She said, "Eat while it's hot." Behind her, my father hovered, pretending to examine the bookshelf. When he finally spoke, it was in that soft register he reserves for students who've done something impossibly brave. "Whatever the penalties are," he said, "I'll cover them." I didn't look up. "No, sir," I replied, still typing. "This one's mine." Owning the cost was part of rebuilding the load path. In design, you don't hide a weak beam behind molding. You replace it so the house doesn't tremble every time the wind changes. I started with the planner. Mrs. Davis is the kind of woman who can conjure a seating chart that diffuses 3 family feuds and a gluten allergy. I respected her competence and the kindness with which she'd shepherded me through decisions that now felt like someone else's dream. When she answered, her voice was bright with last night's afterglow. "Amelia, darling, the party was exquisite. I've never seen the estate look so—" I didn't let her complete the sentence. "Mrs. Davis," I said, steady as a level, "I'm calling to cancel the wedding." There was a clink, as if her pen had slipped against porcelain. "I beg your pardon?" "I'm canceling," I repeated. "Please pause all deliverables and outreach. Send me a breakdown of every fee and clawback. I will honor them." Silence stretched, not hostile, just stunned. "Well," she said at last, the professional instinct reasserting itself, "then we'll take good care of you through this. I'll email the schedule of obligations within the hour." People who are good at their jobs are a species of comfort. They reduce the chaos by one notch simply by existing. Next were the vendors. I kept the sentences short and clean, the way you write field notes you know someone else will rely on. To the estate. Per Section 4. 2. Please confirm cancellation and liquidated damages. I accept all terms. To the caterer. Please release the date and invoice costs to date. To the dressmaker. Suspend fittings. I'll arrange for pickup of patterns. Thank you for your beautiful work. To the printer of invitations we hadn't even mailed. Stop the run. Bill me for materials and time. My emails did not explain Jackson, Clara, or the theater of honesty that had been staged in candlelight. Explanations invite negotiation. A boundary is not a debate. It is a line drawn and then respected by the one who drew it. Relatives began to call as if they'd coordinated through some ancient Charleston WhatsApp whose membership is hereditary. Some voices trembled with concern, others with gossip disguised as concern. We heard, did he? I answered each version with the same sentence. The wedding is canceled for personal reasons. Thank you for understanding. When they probed for causes, I offered the verbal equivalent of a closed door. I'm focusing on next steps. If you've ever observed a hurricane path on the news, you know how people narrate disasters in real time. Anxiety, rumor, old stories revived to fill silence, but I was not a live broadcast. I was triage. I was scope of work. Jackson called, then texted, then called again. The first messages came laced with performance. I was honest. Why are you punishing me? Then came the wounded self-portrait. You humiliated me. You made me look like a fool. After that, the condescension. Be reasonable. You're overreacting. It's a trinity you see often when power meets a boundary it didn't anticipate. Virtue, victimhood, belittlement, rotating fast enough to create the illusion of truth. I kept the phone on silent and set it face down. A partner's crisis isn't always your emergency. Sometimes it's an invitation to abandon yourself in order to rescue their image. I had done the math. The structure didn't pencil out. Between emails, I gathered the paper relics of the old plan and arranged them in order, not as a penance but as an archive. Palette swatches that had once tasted like buttercream and hydrangea now read neutral, as if the color had receded from a life that no longer belonged to me. I slid them into a craft envelope labeled with the blunt honesty of a site plan, not this house. I tucked the envelope onto a shelf where my graduate notebooks live, things that taught me something and then relinquished me to the next learning. By mid-morning, Mrs. Davis's spreadsheet landed in my inbox, immaculate. Line items, due dates, clauses quoted verbatim from contracts, a column titled Amelia's Responsibility that she'd highlighted in pale yellow, the color of mercy. I opened my banking app and transferred funds into a newly created sub-account named Fees, corral the costs, withstand the shock, keep the lights on. I copied my father on nothing. This was not pride, it was alignment with the person I say I am. If you preach structures of integrity for a living, you ought to be able to hold a beam on your own property. My parents orbited like gentle satellites, offering presence without intrusion. My mother folded linens with the devotional attention of someone praying with her hands. My father ran the dishwasher as if order at the level of forks might ripple outward. At lunch, he sat across from me and told a story from his first semester teaching when he scrapped a beautifully designed syllabus that didn't serve actual humans. There is a difference, he said, between what looks elegant on paper and what holds up when people lean on it. I knew he was not talking about the syllabus. In the afternoon, the estate manager replied with a formal confirmation. "We are sorry to lose your event," he wrote, "and wish you well. Please find attached the statement of damages per clause 4.2. His email was the written equivalent of a bowed head. Professionals again offering dignity by refusing to be part of a spectacle. The dressmaker sent a photograph of the sketch pinned to muslin and a note that said simply, "A good design can be remade when the time is right." I cried then, not for the dress, but for the way a stranger had framed the future without trespassing into it. Around 3, a cousin texted a screenshot of an Instagram story where someone had posted a blurry video from the party with subtitles that paraphrased Jackson's ultimatum into something even more theatrical than it had been. The comments had begun their familiar work. Judgments disguised as certainty, pity dressed as prayer, delight in the spectacle dressed as moral concern. I put my phone on airplane mode and set it in a drawer. There are houses you do not need to enter, rooms whose windows you can let stay shut. The work of the day was not PR. It was demolition. Every so often I stood and stretched, letting my eyes rest on the live oaks outside the window. There's an old Charleston belief that the oaks remember. They carry stories in their shade and their scars. I asked them silently to hold last night's story so I didn't have to. I am not mystical by trade, but I've worked long enough with wood and time to know that materials have memory. We write ourselves into our surroundings, and if we're lucky, they hold steady when we're shaky. Late afternoon, my inbox went quiet, that lull when office is empty and people turn toward dinner. I closed the laptop and felt the oddest sensation. Lightness. Not triumph. Not spite. Just weight removed from a beam that had never been designed to carry it. In my field notes, I wrote a single sentence. Foundation. Reassess. It looked like a directive and a creed. The doorbell rang. I didn't have to look through the sidelight to know who was there. Some arrivals you can sense by the way the air tilts. My father moved to the hall, a man who would always choose conversation over conflict if conversation were honest and safe. I touched his sleeve. "I'll handle it," I said, and heard how calm my voice sounded. Calm isn't the absence of fear, it's the presence of a plan. I opened the door onto the gold of late sun, and the figure of a man who had not expected to find a wall where he believed there would be a welcome. The lilies in his hand trembled slightly. The performance had changed costumes. But a costume is still a costume. "Amelia," Jackson said, "we need to talk." The lilies were white and trembling, the way a lie trembles when it's dressed up as an apology. Jackson stood on my porch with the late sun behind him like a backlight, trying to make a better silhouette. He didn't say hello. "We need to talk," he said, as if the urgency itself were proof he deserved the conversation. My father hovered a step behind me, a loyal bulwark disguised as a retired professor. I squeezed his hand once, "Thank you, I've got it," and stepped onto the boards that had been sanded smooth by the lives before ours. "What is it, Jackson?" I kept my voice in the range where builders discuss tolerances and load paths, not feelings. He pushed the bouquet at me, the petals brushing my knuckles. "For you." I did not take them. His jaw flexed. "You humiliated me," he said, opening with indictment, as if offense could be traded for truth. "You made me look like a fool in front of my family, my colleagues. I felt, not heat, but an engineer's cool. You gave an ultimatum in a room full of people," I said. "You made you look like a fool." "It was honesty," he snapped. "I was being transparent from the start." "Honesty is a table where two people sit," I answered, "not a podium." I let the sentence land, simple as a plumb line. The lilies drooped a little, the heat or the truth undoing them by degrees. He switched tactics, as men sometimes do when the mirror doesn't reinforce the story. "Do you know what this means for our families? For the Pierce name? For the investors watching? We have contracts, Amelia. We have expectations." He spoke the word expectations, like a banknote we owed together. "Your family's reputation is not the structure I'm tasked with holding up," I said quietly. "I design buildings where people can live and be safe. I'm not going to build a marriage on a clause that says your past gets permanent residence while I sign for the light bill." His eyes flicked past me into the cool of my parents' hallway, into the framed photographs and the map of coastal marsh my father loves, into a home where all the love was ordinary and therefore invincible. "So that's it?" he said, voice sharpening. "A public okay, and now an email canceling everything? No discussion?" "We had a discussion," I said. "You gave a public test and expected a private grade you could revise later." I nodded toward the lilies. "You can leave those on the railing if you like. The gardener will compost them." He flinched as if I'd struck him with the softness of my tone. "I chose the wrong moment," he said, offering concession now that the crowd was gone. "But we can fix it. I'll set boundaries with Clara." Jackson, I said, and the way his name sounded in my mouth told me what I already knew. The door was closing with the gentle finality of good carpentry. "I'm not your renovation project, and I won't compete with an annex you refuse to detach from the house." I took one step back, the universal choreography that means the conversation is over. Please leave. Anger flashed, then something like surprise at his own anger, then the lazy reach for jealousy. "Is there someone else?" he demanded, eyes slicing toward my father as if the answer might be posted on the family calendar. "Did you line up a replacement?" I felt pity then, the harmless kind, like watching a child look for a stair where there isn't one. "There's a different life," I said, "and it doesn't include this." I closed the door with care. No slam, no show. The latch clicked like a period. In the quiet hallway, I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding since the quartet's first note the night before. My father set the lilies gently in the kitchen sink and turned on the cold water, a small, practical benediction, as if mercy were a faucet that could rinse away residue. My mother handed me a dish towel. We didn't speak. Love, done right, knows when silence heals faster than counsel. After he left, the house adjusted itself around the absence, the way structures redistribute weight when a column is removed. The floor did not groan. It breathed. I returned to my laptop and sent the remaining cancellations. It felt like unscrewing the bolts of scaffolding that had supported a facade, revealing the honest, unfinished wall beneath. Ugly? Maybe. True? Yes. A surface you can actually build on. Grief arrived that night the way coastal fog does, thin at first, then heavy enough you need your hand out to find the porch rail. I let it in, sat with it at the drafting table, and wrote until the page steadied me. In the margins, a sentence: "Demolition is not a failure when the blueprint was wrong." I slept and did not dream of chandeliers. Then work called, which is to say life did. A colleague connected me with a project that sounded like rescue without the white horse, a long-vacant townhouse in the French Quarter, mid-19th century bones, beautiful ironwork gone tired, courtyard choked with weeds, heart pine floors waiting under grime for a second light. A private collector had purchased it to become a modern gallery that respected the old house's soul. The phrase alone, respect the soul, made something inside me sit up straight. On the first site visit, I walked through rooms that smelled of dust and time, pressing my palm to walls the way doctors press 2 fingers to a wrist. The roof had failed in one corner and brought its apology in the form of a soft spot on the second floor. The mantels were carved, delicate as lace, and one of them had been tunneled by termites into a fragile miracle that could not hold its own weight. The courtyard, under its tangle, still knew how to hold light. "Every time I'm here, I notice a detail I missed," a voice said from the threshold, a gentle tenor that did not need to command the room to belong in it. I turned. He wasn't Jackson. No flash, no performative posture. Linen shirt, cotton pants, a face you could look at for a long time without finding the part where it pretended. "Ethan Cole," he said, extending a steady hand. "Please call me Ethan." "Amelia," I replied. We shook, and the handshake was the right length. Confidence, not claim. We traced the floor plan together, not as buyer and vendor, but as 2 people collaborating on a story whose language was light and load and memory. He stopped at the termite-eaten mantel and rested his fingertips against the wood the way someone touches a sleeping animal. "My mother loved this," he said, almost to himself. "It was my father's favorite room." "It's beautiful," I said, "and it's no longer safe." He looked at me, really looked, the way someone listens with their eyes. "What would you do?" "Replicate it," I answered. "Reclaimed wood with the same carving, same proportion. Preserve whatever original fragments can be stabilized behind museum glass with a simple frame and a plaque that tells the truth. This is what time does. This is how love answers." I felt suddenly self-conscious, like I'd said too much. But Ethan smiled. Not the smile that sells deals, the one that says, "Thank you for bringing your brain." "That respects the soul," he said. We argued lightly over the stair railing, spiral or straight run, over the glazing in the courtyard, wider panes or multi-pane, over the placement of track light so that art would float without glare. We sat on the dusty steps and drank water, the sound of traffic a distant ocean. He didn't ask about the ring that wasn't on my finger. I didn't ask about the photographs he didn't mention. We spoke instead about light angles in winter and how pine boards give back their shine if you apologize to them with patience and sandpaper. Documentary truth. In the weeks after a rupture, what heals you fastest isn't the opposite of what broke you. It's the thing that always made you yourself. For me, that is work with a moral geometry. Take the broken and make it not new, but whole. By sundown, I had a notebook full of sections and elevations and a mind mercifully clear of last names and Instagram stories. In the courtyard, the gnats did their small golden dance in the slanting light. I stood there and thought, this, not the ballroom, is where a future begins. Back home, I washed the dust from my hands and slept as if the house itself were standing guard. In the morning, I drafted the first concept set. Respect the facade's rhythm, open the interior flow, raise the courtyard's glass to cradle a moon. I titled the folder Renaissance before I knew why and sent the PDFs to Ethan with notes about scheduling, permits, and the Preservation Commission's review cycles. Minutes later, his reply, "Let's build it." I smiled into the screen's glow, a private ceremony with no witnesses and exactly the right vows. 3 days into site prep, a familiar engine growled at the curb and the hair at the back of my neck rose, the way old houses creak before a storm. I didn't need to turn to know which past had found its way to the threshold of my new work. The black sports car idled at the curb like a threat that had learned manners. On our side of the construction fence, a crew was unloading lumber, the foreman shouting measurements over the rattle of a compressor. Heat lay over the French Quarter block in a wavering veil. I wiped plaster dust from my wrists and walked to the gate, the smell of pine and old brick following me like proof that my life had moved addresses. Jackson stepped out balancing a bouquet of white lilies and the expression of a man who'd practiced contrition in a mirror. The bouquet looked heavy, as if apology weighed more than he'd expected. I opened the gate enough for me to stand in the gap, nothing more. Boundaries are not cruelty, they're door frames built to code. "Amelia," he said, my name as a plea, then a complaint, then a claim, all in 2 syllables. "Can we talk?" "This is my job site," I answered. "Say what you need to say in 1 minute." He shifted the flowers between hands. His suit had creases that weren't from a tailor. "I was wrong," he started, and for a second the sentence hung there, startling as a bird that lands in your palm. I picked the wrong time, the wrong place. I shouldn't have said it like that. He searched my face for softening. "I can fix this. I'll set boundaries with Clara. No more late-night calls, no more—" "Jackson," I interrupted gently, "what you call boundaries are still permissions you grant yourself. I won't live on a permit that can be revoked." He blinked, as if the word permit offended his sense of ownership. "You're punishing me," he said. "You're punishing us. You canceled without even talking to me. Do you understand what this has done to me? My work? My reputation?" In the space behind him, heat shimmered above the car's hood. Behind me, a nail gun snapped 2 studs into agreement. "Your reputation is not a beam I have to carry," I said. "You made a public ultimatum. I made a private decision. Both are honest. Only one was a performance." He took a half-step forward, testing the gate's swing. I didn't move. He recalibrated mid-breath, reaching for tenderness like a script he only half believed. "I can't sleep," he murmured. "I can't eat. I keep thinking how good we were before all this noise. I brought your favorite flowers. Remember our first trip to Savannah? You said lilies smelled like clean pages." He offered the bouquet. The splayed white trumpets trembled. "You're shaking," I said, and for an instant pity brushed my shoulder like a moth. He thought it meant I was opening the door. "Take them," he urged. "Let's start over." "I don't start over around a clause that stays," I said, "and we won't talk here again. Don't come to my work." A voice carried from the shade of the house. "Water!" Ethan called, crossing the threshold with 2 cold bottles in his hands. He read the scene in a single glance, stopped 10 paces back and did nothing heroic. He waited. He let me be the architect of my own boundary. The restraint was a kind of shelter. Jackson's eyes cut to him. The penitent's mask slipped, jealousy peeking out like a child under a tablecloth. "Ah," he said, the word curdling. "So that's the blueprint. You didn't waste time." My patience snapped with a clean sound. "Don't bring other people into messes you made," I said, my voice carrying enough to make the crew glance over and then respectfully away. "Leave." He held my stare a moment too long, then tossed the lilies down onto the dust. The white trumpets hit the ground with a dull softness and scattered like fallen punctuation. He turned, slid into the car, and spun the wheel too hard, leaving the bouquet behind and the smell of anger in his exhaust. Silence reassembled itself. The foreman lifted a brow. "You okay?" And I nodded. Ethan walked the rest of the way and held out one of the bottles without commentary. The chill shocked my palm back into my body. "Are you all right?" he asked. There was no tilt of judgment, no appetite for a story. "I am," I said, surprised to hear the truth in it. There are moments you discover the past can come looking for you with flowers and you don't feel compelled to let it in for a glass of water. Work has a mercy the heart sometimes lacks. It tells you exactly what needs doing next. We hung shade cloth in the courtyard, marked out trench lines for the new conduit runs, and pulled the termite-eaten mantle from the wall with the tenderness reserved for elders. When we laid it on padded horses, the wood sighed, a tired cathedral. I ran my fingers lightly along its carved scrolls and thought about how beauty and time are in a long marriage, how honesty is refusing to pretend a beam can carry what it cannot. That evening, after the noise and dust had settled, I rinsed my hands at the site sink and my phone vibrated with a number I didn't know. The message was short, the tone precise. "Hi, Amelia. This is Clara Reed. I heard Jackson came to your workplace today. I think we should talk, for both our sakes. I stood there with damp hands and read it 3 times, as if clarity were hidden in the repetition. Then I replied, tomorrow 10 a.m. Linden Tea Room, corner table by the back window. The Linden is where secrets go to lose their bite. Cane chairs, green porcelain cups, a pastry case that forgives a multitude of sins. Clara was already at the corner table when I arrived, a calm in a silk blouse. She was beautiful the way good decisions are beautiful, clean, unperformed, deliberate. She stood and offered a hand. Thank you, truly. Thank you for reaching out, I said, and we sat. The server left us with steam and lemon. I'll be direct, Clara began, eyes steady. Jackson and I ended a long time ago. It was overdue, but what didn't end was his reliance on me as the person he called when his ego cratered or when he needed a business sanity check. I let it continue out of habit and, frankly, out of guilt. That's on me. I'm engaged now. She turned her phone to show a photograph. 2 people smiling in a field, the light uncomplicated. He announced that ultimatum at your party without my knowledge, as if he could stage a past and a future on the same platform. It wasn't about honesty, it was about control. There was no blame in her voice for me, and no apology for herself that begged absolution. It landed as clarity, mine, hers, ours. I suspected as much, I said. Hearing it from you is release. He's not a villain, she said softly. He's an unfinished house he keeps inviting people to live in. At some point, you stop moving in your furniture. We sipped. The room hummed with other lives. Thank you, I said again, because gratitude, like grief, arrives in waves. For what it's worth, I'm sorry he used you as a precedent in a closing argument I didn't consent to hear. She exhaled a laugh. We'll both choose better courts. We left without exchanging promises or numbers, an agreement encoded in the nod we shared. 2 women who declined to be architecture for someone else's ego. Outside, the air had thickened into that bright tension Charleston knows so well, the sky building its case for rain. I walked back to the site as clouds stacked like slate. By late afternoon, the first fat drops darkened the dust, and then the sky opened with the full conviction of summer. The crew secured what needed securing and cleared, leaving the place to the sound of water drumming on the courtyard's concrete and the metal scaffolding ticking as it cooled. Under the new glass roof we'd framed but not yet sealed, Ethan and I stood in the dry rectangle, watching the rain do its ancient work. Storms are honest, he said after a while. They show you where the leaks always were. I thought of a ballroom and a microphone. They also wash the air, I answered. We didn't look at each other. We looked at the pattern the rivulets made, the way water obeys gravity and finds truth no matter how artful the detours. When my first gallery failed, he said, not as a confession, just as part of the weather, I blamed market timing, then a critic, then a contractor. Eventually, I had to say, I hung the wrong shows for the people I said I served. It hurt. And then it let me build this. He gestured at the bones around us, the promise inside the noise. Demolition isn't shameful when the plan is wrong, I said. It was the sentence from my margin, now voiced into a room that needed it. We fell into a quiet that felt like placing a hand on a finished wall and feeling it hold. The courtyard smelled of rain and old wood. Beyond the fence, a siren wailed and subsided. Inside my pocket, my phone buzzed. A message from an industry friend with a talent for understatement. You seeing headlines out of New York? One of Jackson's flagship developments is wobbling. Investor walked. Rumor says leadership style plus chaos. Call me later if you want details. I didn't open the link. Weather reports come when they come. The storm eased to a whisper. We watched the last drops fall from the scaffold, silver commas in a sentence that had finally learned where to end. The morning after the storm, the city smelled like concrete cleaned by angels. Worksite mornings have their own liturgy. Keys on a ring, the squeal of the rolling gate, boots scuffing dust into purpose. I arrived early with bakery bags and a clipboard. The crew drifted in, grateful, and we ate kolaches over the hood of a truck the way a team eats before a long day, heads bent, elbows out, laughter small and decent. A gallery is built on measurements and mortar, yes, but also on the ordinary kindnesses that keep people standing shoulder to shoulder. I kept my phone face down until the first walkthrough. When I finally turned it over, the headlines had done their efficient circling. A Manhattan real estate play, Jackson's, had shed a primary investor after strategic misalignment and project turbulence. The language was corporate for what an insider text spelled plainly. He'd fought everyone, ignored his own engineers, and tried to win the physics of budgets with charisma. In the commentariat, there's a cruelty reserved for those whose hubris crests in public. I read none of it. I've never found healing in other people's autopsies. At noon, under the shade cloth, we laid out the updated electrical plan. Conduit bends, fixture drops, dimmer zoning. I like the math of light, how you can draw a line from the moment a gallery goer enters to where their breath will catch. We repositioned 2 tracks to keep glare off a series of large works Ethan wanted to feature in the opening show, then adjusted the sightlines from the mezzanine so the view of the courtyard would be a reveal and not a spoiler. A breath, then a second breath, Ethan said, nodding, and I felt the articulation ripple through the plan like a rhyme. Between tasks, the phone vibrated again. This time, a voicemail. Jackson's voice threaded with a panic that made him sound decades younger. I didn't press play. There is a difference between being a witness and being an audience. Later, as I checked the submittals for the glass manufacturer, he called live. I answered, not out of curiosity, but out of the belief that closure sometimes requires hearing the door click from the other side. Amelia? The way he said my name wasn't a plea or a claim, it was a grasp. Everything's falling apart. They're saying I'm the problem. The investor walked. The board is? He stopped, breath hitching. I need you. Need is a word like load. It should be calculated, not presumed. I'm sorry this is happening, I said, and meant it, but your business decisions are yours to repair. If you hadn't left, if you'd stayed, we wouldn't have... The sentence broke over its own rock. If I had stayed, you would have stood on me to reach what you wanted, I said evenly, and sooner or later I would have broken. That isn't partnership. That's scaffolding. Clara won't talk to me, he blurted, reaching for the old lifeline. She says I used her. She's engaged. She won't pick up. In the pause, I could hear the edges of his apartment, the echo of an expensive room that doesn't know how to hold grief. You were supposed to be different. You were supposed to understand me. I understand you better than you think, I answered. Enough to know I'm not the solution you're trying to outsource. Jackson, listen to me. Blame and bargains won't fix a collapsed beam. You have to reframe the load or the structure fails again. You talk like it's a building, he said, a tired bitterness in his voice. It is, I said softly. Everything is. I didn't add, including the part of you that keeps staging ultimatums and calling it honesty. He was quiet, and for a moment, I thought the quiet might be a door opening to an interior room he'd avoided. But then the panic surged, and with it the tide of accusation. You abandoned me when I needed you most. I left when you told me, in front of 100 people, that I would always live next to your past, I said. I hope you find the right engineer for your life. It isn't me. He tried to speak over me. I spoke one word, goodbye. Then I hung up, placed the phone face down on the sawhorse, and breathed until my ribs obeyed again. Neutrality slid into me like cool water, not triumph, not vindication, just the absence of heat. In trauma circles, they talk about the North Star of healing not as joy, though joy comes, but as neutrality toward what once hijacked your nervous system. In that moment, a voice that used to command my weather sounded like a forecast for a place I no longer lived. Work filled the afternoon. We set the ledger angles for the courtyard's glass, revised the hardware schedule to avoid a supply chain delay, and chalked lines where walls would rise from old footprints with new purpose. When the light angled gold, we swept. The crew peeled away in waves, back to families and dinners and couches that forgive dust on boots. I stayed to check the day's notes, and Ethan lingered to carry a trash bag to the skip. The simplest ministries. "Spare 15 minutes?" he asked. I nodded. He fished 2 enamel cups from a box and poured coffee he'd smuggled in a thermos. We sat on the steps between the old and the soon-to-be, the courtyard pool reflecting a strip of sky. "I want to do a small thank you," he said, "for the crew. Not fancy, just acknowledgement. They've been giving this place more than their hours." "A sight toast," I said, smiling. "The good kind of ceremony." 2 days later we did it. We gathered in the central hall, bare plaster, ribs of light across the floor, the scent of sawdust and citrus cleaner. On a folding table, sandwiches, sweet tea, sparkling water, and a pie Mrs. Cole sent that tasted like summer took human form. Ethan spoke briefly, the way leaders do when they remember the pronoun is we. He thanked the electricians for the clean runs, the masons for their patience with crumbly mortar, the young apprentice who'd learned to float plaster without carving it. Then he turned, unplanned, to me. "This place had a pulse when we bought it," he said. "Amelia gave it rhythm." The crew clapped, a sound unembarrassed by sincerity. I felt my face heat the good way. Praise is not a goal of the work, but it can be a kind of rest. After the crew drifted out, we stayed, 2 dots in a room learning to be itself. "There are days I wasn't sure we could save it," Ethan said, eyes on the cornice where old and new plaster met without announcing the seam. "But you kept pointing to where the truth was." I wanted to say, "You did too." Instead, I asked about the opening show. He talked in low tones about the artists, one who paints the marsh the way memory keeps it, one who welds iron into lines that look like script. As he spoke, his hands drew shapes in the air, a choreography of care. It is disarming to be near someone whose attention is not a currency, but an abode. The next weeks moved on rails. We passed inspection milestones that always make me sweat. Framing, rough-in, insulation, a tidy list that spells future. The oak at the corner of the block shaded us through noon. The courtyard glass arrived on a Thursday, and we set it with 4 pairs of hands and the held breath that attends fragile things. When the last pane seated with a soft sigh into its gasket, the building exhaled with us. Life outside the site continued its chatter. An aunt left a voicemail that managed to ask how I was while warning me which circles were talking. I forwarded vendors their final cancellations and watched payments clear from the FE's subaccount with a relief so adult it felt like quiet power. Clara sent a single text, saw the investor news. "I hope you're okay." I replied, "You too. Weather, not gossip." One humid evening, I got home to find my mother at the table with a box of my childhood drawings. She'd rescued them from a closet a week earlier, the houses with impossible staircases, the rooms where light poured from windows larger than their walls could reasonably hold. We flipped through them the way you flip through a stranger's story until you recognize it as your own. "You always drew foundations darker," she said, tapping a crayon basement. "Even when no one else would see them." "That's where the truth is," I said, and for the first time in weeks, I heard my voice carry no trace of brittle. The next afternoon, as I measured the height of the plinths for the front gallery, my phone vibrated again. A tone I associate with uncertainty, a text from Jackson, spare and unlike his others. Could I have 10 minutes in person? One last time. I won't argue. I just need to say something I should have said before. I stared at the words long enough to count the breath between them. There is a kind of closure that's performance, and a kind that is simple housekeeping of the soul. I felt no tug, no dread. Just a sense that an untied thread could be knotted without looping me into a net. I typed back, 10 minutes, Linden Tea Room, tomorrow at 9. If you weaponize it, I walk. His reply came with unusual speed. Understood. That night I reviewed the punch list and set my alarm. Sleep came easy. That gift reserved for days in which the body has moved and the mind has lined its tools in order. Neutrality held. The city outside exhaled. The house was quiet. Somewhere, an unfinished life fumbled for a blueprint. Mine was rolled and rubber-banded, ready for the next day's light. The Linden tea room opens the way a careful heart does, slowly, with quiet light and the faint clink of porcelain. I arrived a few minutes early and chose the same corner table where Clara and I had sat, as if the room itself were a ledger that preferred symmetry. The server set down a small pot and 2 cups, reading the arrangement like weather. Jackson came on the minute, thinner, the expensive edges of him sanded down to something human. He didn't perform surprise, delight, or pain. He took the chair opposite and folded his hands. "Thank you," he said, the words landing without audience. "You have 10 minutes," I replied. My voice was a neutral hallway. He nodded, as if the limit were a kindness. "I was wrong," he said first. Not a preface this time, but the content. At the party, before it, after. I called control courage and hurt people with it. I told myself that honesty was saying everything I wanted in public, and I never considered the burden I was shifting onto you, onto others, to keep my image from cracking. He met my eyes and did not flinch. "I'm sorry." Apologies have electricity when they contain voltage and ground. His did. He didn't bargain. He didn't ask for a return. He named. "I weaponized Clara's history because I liked having a door I could hold open to a room where I felt important," he went on. "I used you as a stage where I could look like a better man than I was, and when you refused to play the part, I called your boundary cruelty." He exhaled. "I've been dismantled, some of it by the market, most of it by me. I'm not asking you to come back. I just thought that if this story is going to sit in our lives forever, I should at least be the one who tells the truth about my chapter." We were both quiet long enough to hear steam whispering from the spout. I poured tea and slid a cup toward him. He didn't reach for it. "Thank you," I said, "for the apology. For not trying to hand me a blueprint to fix." The relief I felt had no wings or music. It was the grounded kind, like setting down a heavy bucket you hadn't noticed you were still carrying. I accept it. He swallowed and nodded, a small release uncoiling in his shoulders. "I wish you well," he said, and I believed him. "And I'm sorry to Clara," he added almost to himself. "I told her last week. She didn't need to accept it, but I needed to say it." "Then you did the right work," I answered. "The kind that isn't a performance." We shook hands, a simple closure that felt like turning a page with clean fingers. He left without looking back. I sat a moment longer and watched the cup cool. Documentary aside, not every story demands a reversal. Sometimes the arc is a line that ends in a period, not a loop. Closure is not spectacle, it is housekeeping. Outside, the morning had that early clarity Charleston gets after a run of humid days, as if the city had been rinsed and hung up to dry. At the site, the building received me like a living thing you've tended through fevers. The main structural restoration was complete. The new roof nested in its steel like a paneled sky. Walls that had been belly-soft with age now read true. The heart pine floors flashed their quiet amber when the sun moved across them. In the central hall, the crew had left the folding table neatly stacked. The pie tin from Mrs. Cole was wrapped in foil with a note. "Next one soon." We entered the phase of work I love best, the gentle certainty of finishing. Electrical trims went on like punctuation. Fixture by fixture, we tuned the gallery's light until it sounded like a chord. The masons tucked their last tidy mortar lines where no one would ever look, which is how you know the work is honest. Ethan and I paced the rooms with sketches in our hands, deciding which wall would carry which breath. "This diptych wants the afternoon," he murmured, and I raised a hand to measure the fall of sun. "Then we give it the afternoon," I said. Opening night had a name now, Renaissance, Ethan's choice, mine the first to nod. Not for grandiosity, but because the word meant what we were asking the building to do, be born again, keeping its memory. One evening, when the glass above the courtyard turned the sky into a bowl, Ethan asked if I could spare an hour. We drove to White Point Garden because he said there are questions the river answers better than walls do. The live oaks arched over us like ribs. The cannons slept in their green rooms. We walked among bronze and shade until the harbor's horizon lifted its slow breath. He stopped at a view I've loved since childhood, where the water pretends it has always known your name. Amelia, he said, my name without claim, only regard. From the day you pressed your palm to that dusty wall, I felt the building steady, but it wasn't only the building. He reached into his pocket and held a small box the way one holds a fragile truth. No kneel, no crowd, no choreography. He opened it. Inside, a band of warm metal with a fine engraving along its arc, the motif lifted from the gallery's ironwork, a history we had rescued now spun into a future we could wear. Our story started in a ruin at sunset, he said, voice quiet in the open air. You gave it light and let it keep its scars. That's all I ever wanted in a life, and now I want it with you. I don't want a pedestal, and I won't hand you one. I want work and wonder and the ordinary goodness of earning our days. Will you marry me? Something in me that had learned to brace, unbraced. The ring felt like a circle that knew where it came from. I saw his hand, steady and open. I saw the garden, holding so many old endings and beginnings that ours could tuck itself among them and not feel singled out. Yes, I said, the word as simple and complete as a beam that spans what it needs to span. My eyes watered, not with relief, not with vindication, but with the recognition of a structure that would hold. We didn't cheer. We walked, the way you walk through a newly finished room, touching the trim with your fingertips, memorizing what you now inhabit. On the drive back, we talked about the logistics opening in our future, the way shipping lanes open on a map. Families, dates, not a spectacle but a supper, vows we'd write that sounded like the way we work, plain, brave, rooted. At a stoplight, he turned his palm upward on the console. I placed mine in it. The light changed. We went on. In the days that followed, the building ripened. Painters cut their lines with the care of surgeons. The last pane of glass in the clear story seated with a sigh that felt like punctuation. The mantel replica arrived, the carving respectful, the heft right, and we mounted it, then hung, in the small gallery off the foyer, the salvaged fragments of the original behind glass with a simple plaque. Original mantle, c. 1858, preserved with gratitude, time and termites. We did not pretend we had restored what cannot be restored. We told the truth and made beauty beside it. Mrs. Cole came by with armfuls of flowers she said were only for practicing, but which transformed the air with their plain joy. She squeezed my hands the way mothers do when they approve of a choice a person has made beyond their sight. You brought it back, she said to the building, and then, unexpectedly, to me. I blinked at the floor until the emotion found a shelf. We planned a small, pre-opening toast for the crew and the artisans who had signed their names into hidden places. Ethan wanted to say thank you before the world showed up because the people who do the work deserve to see the room glow first. The night before that toast, I stood alone in the central hall and turned the dimmers down until the space became a held breath. I remembered the ballroom and the word okay, how it had sounded like a beginning to only one of us. I thought about how sometimes the most radical thing a woman can do is not perform, not plead, not burn the place down for the crowd, but draft a plan and execute it without theater, say a word, then build a life. The morning of the toast, Ethan stopped me at the door. 1 minute, he said, mischief quieting the seriousness in his eyes. He led me to the courtyard under the glass where, overnight, he'd hung a simple sign. Renaissance. The letters clean as if cut from light. Beneath it, a smaller plaque, a collaboration of craftspeople, neighbors, and time. Curated by Ethan Cole, restored by architect Amelia Hayes. I laughed, stupid, happy laughter that startled a sparrow from the gutter. You didn't have to do that, I said. I get to, he answered. By evening, the room hummed with the people who'd made it real. We raised paper cups and spoke without microphones. Ethan thanked them with we again. I looked at their hands and thought, not of fate, but of skill and hours, the secular graces that bring a building back from the brink. After they left, the two of us stood in the emptied hall as the light slid toward blue. "Look," he whispered. The glass roof was holding a perfect moon. Opening night did not arrive like a trumpet. It came like dawn, quiet, deliberate, the gallery filling one human at a time until the room carried a recognizable pulse. Outside, the French Quarter's cobblestones wore their evening shine. Inside, heart pine floors glowed with the confidence of wood forgiven and restored. We had decided against spectacle. No red rope, no drone shots, no hashtags stenciled on walls. The sign over the courtyard simply read Renaissance, and beneath it the plaque thanked craftspeople, neighbors, and time, our only influencers. Guests moved through the rooms with the slow curiosity of people meeting a house that had something to say. The marsh painter's canvases breathed salt and wind. The iron-line sculptor's pieces cast filigree shadows that looked like handwriting the air had taught itself. I watched their faces at the first turn, where the sightline opens from the narrow foyer into the main hall, and saw the breath catch we'd planned in pencil 6 weeks ago. Engineering can be a form of hospitality. You choreograph light and space so a stranger can locate their awe. My parents stood near the back wall, hands intertwined, doing that particular parental magic trick of simultaneously beaming and pretending not to. My mother wore a dress the color of pearl and the expression of a woman who once folded a dish towel in a quiet kitchen while her daughter canceled a wedding. Now she folded her happiness into the corners of her eyes. My father had the posture of a professor on the last day of class, when the syllabus has been lived instead of merely read. Across the room, a familiar figure lifted a hand. Clara had come with her fiancé, the same untroubled light in the photograph now moving beside her as a man. We didn't cross the room for a reunion staged in public. We exchanged a nod that meant, the file is closed. The acknowledgement was not coolness, it was skill. Two women declining to turn healing into content. Ethan greeted neighbors, artists, the electrician whose toddler rode his hip like a king, and a mason with mortar under his nails that soap would never convince to leave. When he reached me, the room bent to a softer frequency. "Ready?" he asked. "Always," I said, and felt how true the word had become. We didn't pick up a microphone. Ethan raised a hand and the hum gentled by mutual consent. "Thank you for coming," he began, voice pitched for a dinner table rather than a stage. "Buildings tell stories, whether we intend them to or not." This one was quiet for a long time, and then with patience and many hands, it learned to speak again. "I'm grateful to every person who lent it their labor, their eye, or their faith." He turned to me. "And to the architect who listened to what the house was asking to be." The room clapped, warm, unforced. Praise struck the air and then dissolved back into it. I stepped forward, palms open. "I'll be brief," I said, and the gallery's acoustics carried the sentence like a blessing. My work has always been about two questions: what deserves to last, and what deserves to change? This building had both answers written into its bones. We didn't try to erase its past. We learned it, respected it, and then we built a future that could hold human life with gentleness and strength. I rested my hand on the nearest wall. A foundation is only ever a promise. You find out what it means when weight arrives. A murmur moved through the room, the kind that happens when people recognize something true about both houses and hearts. Thank you to the artisans, to the neighbors who tolerated dust and noise, and a dumpster that became a local landmark, I added, and the room laughed, eased. Thank you to the Preservation Board for reminding us that patience is a building material. And thank you to my parents, who taught me that love is not spectacle, but structure. I looked at Ethan. Thank you to the person who met me in the ruins and said, "Let's build what's honest." After the applause, life resumed itself. Plates arrived and left, conversations braided and unbraided. A child pressed her nose to the glass over the salvaged mantel fragments and sounded out the plaque, "Time and termites." Her father smiled. "That's right. And now we tell the truth about it." The little girl nodded solemnly, as if she had just learned a rule worth keeping. Later, we slipped into the courtyard. Under the glass, the moon hung like a coin you'd never spend. We stood where yesterday's crew had held their paper cups and first claim to the glow, and for a moment, the noise of the city thinned, the sirens and scooters and laughter reduced to a texture you feel more than hear. Ethan touched my elbow, a small address to the present. "Look what they made," he whispered, which was also, "Look what we made," and also, "Look what you became when you stopped performing and began to build." I thought of a ballroom and a word, okay, spoken once without tremor and misunderstood by most. I had worried for a while that okay was too small to be a beginning. It turns out beginnings don't need to be loud. They need to be true. In architecture, nothing is quieter than a beam doing its job, and nothing is more precise than the moment when weight meets capacity and the structure simply holds. Documentary aside, people will tell you closure requires an audience. It doesn't. Closure is a form you file with yourself, stamped with the ink of choices aligned with values. You can complete it in a kitchen, or a tea room, or a courtyard where the rain taught you what leaked. A few remaining guests wandered into the courtyard. My mother looped her arm through my father's. Clara and her fiancé lingered near the ironwork we'd preserved, tracing the scrolls with their eyes. A neighbor set down a homemade pound cake on the refreshments table without ceremony. No one performed an ending. No one needed to. Ethan slid his hand into mine, not as a claim but as an agreement. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll take the tape measure to the world again." "Tomorrow," I echoed. I turned toward the nearest corner, where two walls met at 90 honest degrees, and offered the room a quiet benediction. "May every foundation we build, houses, families, promises, be stronger than their chandeliers," I said under my breath, a prayer simple enough to memorize in the body. Then I looked at the people who had come to witness a house made whole and felt not triumph, not vindication, but a steadiness that is its own kind of joy. To those of you listening to this story now, thank you. Thank you for walking with me through the rooms of it, for standing under the glass when the rain came, for letting silence do its share of the work. I wish you health that holds, homes that welcome, and families, born or chosen, that practice the ordinary mercies, a bowl of soup by a keyboard, a hand on a sleeve, a ride home from a long day. If this story gave you any courage to rebuild what was cracked, or to say a quiet word that opens a truer door, I'm grateful. And if you'd like more stories where drama meets documentary truth and the heart finds its architecture, please subscribe, share, and stay with us. There's more to build. That night, before we turned off the lights, Ethan and I stood in the central hall and dimmed the fixtures until the paintings breathed like sleeping animals. The moon behind the glass kept watch. I thought of the girl at the plaque and her round vowels, time and termites. I smiled. We left the gallery with the door's latch clicking into place, the gentlest kind of ending. Tomorrow would come with its lists and ladders, its emails and errands, its new problems that would require new plans. But tonight, the structure held, and in the quiet of holding, a life, mine, felt fully inhabited.